This video is sponsored by Hero Forge.
So we just had a recent video where I painted Fulgrim and it went big. We got a really good reception and a lot of hugely positive comments. In that video, I kind of went through the journey of exhaustion, of working myself a crazy amount doing this hobby that we all love. And there were a lot of comments that were asking after me, basically saying, take care of yourself, look after yourself. And we've actually been asked a lot of times how we as a professional studio deal with hobby burnout and keeping the passion alive. And it's definitely not unique to us. Most major YouTubers at some point end up doing a video on hobby burnout and content creation. And I think if you're honest with yourself, most hobbyists have experienced it at some point. But as professionals who work in the industry full time, we have to find ways of combating it. So in this video, I really wanted to share our team's insights on what hobby burnout is and techniques we've found to help deal with it that could help you get your favorite hobby back on track. Now, Games Workshop have actually sent us this week's new releases, and I'm going to start building one up. Why is going to make sense a little bit later in the video. For now, let's start building. So what is hobby burnout? Well, put simply, it's where your passion, the thing that you're supposed to be enjoying in your free time, your escape becomes a chore. It's where you lose your enjoyment and it might start to feel like work. Now, in the context of content creators like us, it is work. And I think that's something that a lot of people can struggle to understand from the other side. The idea of doing something you love full time is a blessing that we do not take for granted. It is truly amazing and we're very lucky to do it. But it doesn't mean that every day is cloud nine. And the biggest fear is that you no longer love doing it. That's burnout. And that's what we aim to avoid. For you at home, burnout might come when you've set some over-the-top tournament goal expectations to paint an army on a short deadline. And after the 5th squad of troops that you've been batch painting, you don't want to look at another model in your army. You don't even want to pick up a paintbrush, and the thought of doing it becomes something you dread. And this was meant to be your hobby. And for us, it can come when the models arrive too late, the deadlines are short due to whatever reason, and we put ourselves under an immense amount of pressure to put something out there for public scrutiny. There are all different forms of burnout, and I think you get the idea. But to begin coming up with ways to solve it and help you on your hobby journey, I think there's a big question you need to answer. Minor aside, we do have the gorgeous new Necron model releases and they look really good, but for me, that's not what I'm going for today. It's actually this funny still boy. Why do you do this? Why is this your hobby? And what is it exactly that you enjoy? It's hard to fix the reason you're feeling a bit off about your hobby unless you can find out what it is that's broken. And this was a big realization I actually came to since working at Tabletop time. Doing so many miniature projects and exposing myself to all different techniques, talents, model ranges has been super enlightening and a bit of a journey of self-discovery. And one of the things I discovered is I don't care about playing the game. And this is an interesting one because I enjoy playing the game. I love theory crafting and list building. I enjoy building armies. In fact, having the concept of the models and armies I'd like to build based on the rule systems that I hyper-analyze gives me a structure and a form to my hobby that makes it more satisfying. I don't care about actually playing the game. And why does this matter? Well, it matters because I discovered the core of what it was that gave me joy in the hobby and some of the things that matter a little bit less. It didn't matter if I didn't complete the models by a particular date, as long as I was enjoying the process. Now, this is obviously going to be different for everyone and your why is going to be unique to you. For some, building and painting models for the purpose of getting to that tournament end result is the be all and end all of the hobby, and that's super fine. But for all of the things we're talking about today, I would like you to sit on that and have a think about what it is that's the core of what you actually enjoy about the hobby, because knowing that is going to help you find a solution to hobby burnout. And that's going to lead me to my first tip. If you're like me, you can sometimes suffer with a sense of obligation. No one's telling you to, you just feel this pressure on your shoulders that if you're not doing something productive or you're not making minis or progressing your army, you're somehow wasting your time or your free time. If you're like me, you might create these fake or unimportant deadlines that don't matter to anyone except you, and yet you beat yourself up for not meeting. This can lead you to feeling a sense of overwhelm. If you fit into this camp, my number one tip is what I'm going to be working on throughout the video. Find a model. It's to put aside what you're working on and find something that you can do with no obligation. If you're painting an army, pick up a model off to the side that has nothing to do with it and paint it. This Skatros from Games Workshop is probably one of my favorite Mechanicus models they've released so far. It's so weird and wild and Blanchian, and it just made me want to paint it. I'm not collecting an AdMech army, I'm not promising to collect an AdMech army. This new model release converged with an idea I had, a paint scheme I really like from the Horus Heresy. It's this bronze and jade colored Forge World that used to fight alongside the Thousand Suns, and I thought they looked really pretty, and we very rarely see Mechanicus in those kind of colors. So with those two ideas and feeling kind of bummed out and burnout from spending so much time painting Fulgrim, the idea to take a hobby break. I'm still advancing my hobby, I'm still learning how to do new techniques and paint new things, but this model has no obligation. I'll finish it, I'll sit it on the shelf, and I'll get that dopamine hit, that feeling of satisfaction from being able to look at a project finished because the project had a defined scope. So I'm going to really dig into this build, but I'm not the only one with some solutions to hobby burnout or some ways that I found to manage it or get through it. So while I get started, let's hear from Murray.
I think the biggest piece of advice I could give for hobby burnout is to just remove the pressure from having to paint something. Don't feel like you are obligated to paint, or you have to keep going at a certain pace, and that you can't just put things away. We all have this thing called the pile of shame. We all like to use that phrase. I use it all the time. My pile of shame cannot be contained by a single cupboard anymore, and that's okay. Think of it more like a stockpile of wood for the winter. It's all there for a rainy day. It doesn't matter if it keeps piling up. You have it there, it's your stock rooms, and it's supposed to make you happy. You have something you can just take out of there. The other day I was thinking about starting a new project, and I was like, I don't have this and this and this, and then I realized I did. I had it. It was in the cupboard. I had a whole box of something that was going to be perfect for some new project, and that immediately sparks that sort of interest in what I could do then. And I think if you apply that mindset to burnout, it's okay to not be worried about what you're working on. Take a break, take as long as you need. And it's very important to come to terms that it's okay to not be working on something. And you only need to come back to it when you feel like you want to, when you're like, yes, I'm going to pick up the brush right now and start working on something. That's when the passion is going to hit you the most. That's the fun part of the project, having this spark of inspiration and being able to throw it out into a physical model. And it's very easy to look at artists, perhaps such as us on YouTube, who we always consistently produce content all the time. And I'm going to be honest, sometimes it can be hard. Money is a very good incentive. We are paid to do this. That helps a lot, but we are not infallible. We get burnout a lot. It happens. And I want to drive home the point that you don't need to feel bad about experiencing burnout. So with that in mind, it's time to hand it back to Dave. He's just there. He's working on secret things. Probably, I don't know.
So the Skatros, I've opted to keep some components off it. I really want to have a fun and easy time painting this. I don't want to be trying to angle my brush around complicated arms and his gun. So I'm leaving the guns and the arms off, glued everything else together. Time to spray it. So I talked about trying something new.
Come on, New Zealand, try something new.
Painting something with zero obligation as a good way to deal with burnout. Well, something that sort of goes hand in hand with that and applies to this project is my next tip. This one is more specifically related to the act of painters and painting, but it's to try a new technique. One of the reasons I think we can start to feel burnout is often when we're painting armies and we're doing the same thing over and over and over. There's a sense of repetition that keeps things from being fresh and makes them go a bit stale. When we paint the same armies and the same schemes, which many of us do, we often don't actually experiment, and you might not have realized how stagnant your painting has become. I've certainly gone through that before. So I think it can be really helpful to think about things that you've seen and you'd like to try. Try a new painting technique. Is it OSL? Is it rust and weathering? Take your next model to the next level. Now, it can go hand in hand with painting an obligation-free model, but it doesn't have to. For me today, the new paint scheme is Zao Arcad, which is a Forge World that was aligned with Prospero and the Thousand Suns in the Horus Heresy. The cool thing about this Forge World is they have a really different and vibrant paint scheme. It's lots of goldy brass metallics and then accent colors in emerald green with these awesome runes and scripture on them. It's a really interesting color scheme in an army that is predominantly displayed as being either red or orange or black. Oh, and white. Stygies is white. They kind of ended up being Loyalist and Traitor. There's splinter factions that are Dark Mechanicum now, but the main Forge world stayed loyal. So you can kind of paint the color scheme in Heresy or 40k in both sides, but I haven't seen many people do it. So the Zero Obligation is the Scatros, and the new paint scheme is from the Horus Heresy, something I've just looked at and thought was cool. And the new technique is going to be me continuing to work on true metallic metal. I'd abandoned metallic paints for a long time, and I'm currently on a quest of re-exploring them, using multiple metallic tones as well as shades and glazes to get the most out of those shiny paints. So you can see for me how all of these things are coming together in this Burnout recovery project, but for you, it doesn't have to be a new army. You can try my new technique tip on anything. Perhaps you could grab a character, a model that you could justify having a paint scheme that's a little bit more elevated from your rank and file, and choose something you haven't tried before. Perhaps you'd like to try non-metallic metal, a glow around the lenses, or just a different way of doing weathering and chipping. Trying new techniques can be a really good way to give yourself a fresh challenge. Something that puts a little bit of creative thought and energy back into a process that may have become stagnated. I think a lot of people can be afraid of trying new techniques on an existing army for fear that it will create a lack of cohesion in their army units. I'd encourage you to think a little bit laterally around this. As many war historians and enthusiasts will be able to tell you, war is a time where supply chains are difficult to maintain. Battlefield weathering, dust, battlefield conditions will drastically change the paint schemes and finishes on armor. A fine coat of battle dust can change the tone of paint just as easily as a slightly different mix from a factory or hastily found repaints done from scavenged battlefield supplies. It is perfectly reasonable for your tank to be a slightly different shade of color to your other tanks, especially if you're trying some new techniques. For many, many years, I can personally attest to being trapped behind this wall of not wanting to make hobby progress because I was afraid of how it would make my army look. But every time I've actually stepped out and changed my paint scheme, I've really been happy with those improvements and changes. It's almost like you have to punch through the barrier of being afraid to try something new or being afraid to change your army scheme and just do it. Because if you think about it, avoiding changing the way you paint some of your army is really just allowing yourself to be enslaved to the painter you were months or years ago. You're saying, hey, I started this army 3 years ago. That's the best I'll ever be able to paint, so I'll just leave it there. Now, I know a lot of you don't do this, but I'm sure some of you do. And as with all the tips we talk about today, some are going to apply for some people and others won't. It really does depend on where the passion is in the hobby for you. And the tip of trying a new technique is definitely a tip for painters. I'm sure the tournament players out there are just saying, I want finished models and I don't care how I get there. Well, if that's the case for you and maybe a less painting derived tip could be useful, I think we should pass it over to Jen as we have a think about inspiration and what drives us to do this hobby.
So when Dave asked me about what I do when it comes to hobby burnout, there were a couple of things that came to mind. But firstly, why do I personally get hobby burnout? For me, sometimes I can feel really inadequate or I don't feel like my work is valued. It'll usually take me a bit of time to get back into doing hobby again, and it works a little bit like a train going up and down a hill. Sometimes I'm in a super high and things are going really well, and then sometimes I get really, really down. But it also depends on the project that I'm tackling. Am I doing something new for the first time, or working on a model that's just super different to whatever I've done before? I am a really harsh critic on myself, so sometimes it can lead to massive burnout. But then what do I do to try and break this habit? Well, I am a big fan of art and finding inspiration, and I truly believe you can find inspiration in all different aspects. For me, I personally love going onto Pinterest or Instagram and just doom scrolling for a good couple of hours. But I specifically like to go down a rabbit hole of things that I find interesting. For example, I recently found my love for Japanese culture again and decided I wanted to paint up a couple of minis that represented the shrine maidens in Japan. But it doesn't necessarily have to be art or pictures. Sometimes just losing yourself in music, movie, or even a good book can do wonders for your inspiration. The other thing that I'll tend to do is change up my projects. So for example, if I'm painting up something that's 40k, I might move on to Age of Sigmar just for a little bit of a refresher. Or maybe not even Warhammer, maybe I'll paint something completely different just so I can get lost in a different process. And the last point I want to bring up, which I reckon is probably the most important, is community. I think it is so important to surround yourself with people that are like-minded and support you in your hobby. If you don't know your local friendly game store, absolutely go say hi because they will be absolutely thrilled to help you in your hobby journey. I love seeing people's new projects and the ideas they come up with, and whenever I watch YouTube videos as well, I get super inspired to do my own hobby. And whenever I see someone who's showing off their army for the first time, I also get super inspired to do my own work. work. The sense of community when it comes to Warhammer is absolutely massive. Whether you're into playing games or painting, I feel like we have this really good sense of trying to uplift each other so that we can all enjoy the hobby together. And if you're someone that maybe is a bit remote or finds it really hard to get to their local game store, online is still a really good place to build that sense of community. Whether this is on Facebook, Discord, or any other place, as long as you surround yourself with like-minded people, you will find it easier to do your hobby. But there were just a couple of my tips. Hopefully there's something there that helped you out, because I know I get burnout big time. And I have found that some of these tips can be really helpful. Also, don't forget to splurge every now and then. You gotta treat yourself sometimes.
Now, I've talked about how helpful it can be to find a no-pressure, fun model to paint. Something fun and unique to help give you a boost. And a great place for minis like that is Hero Forge. Hero Forge is an amazing online character customization tool that allows you to create and pose your perfect miniature. With thousands of items, gear, and an infinite amount of poses, you can make exactly the miniature you want. We're about to embark on a brand new RPG campaign, so we at Tabletop Time needed to make new minis. And as always, it was a treat to design them on Hero Forge. Their brand new facial customization features allow for previously impossible levels of customization, with every part of the face able to be customized now. New features such as the age sliders also allow you to quickly add gravitas to your character or ensure they have that fresh face look for a new adventure. And then you can order your miniature in a variety of different mediums, from Hero Forge's redesigned and improved premium plastic to their returning acrylic standees. They've got something for everyone. For us though, it's the STL digital download, allowing us to 3D print and paint our miniatures on the same day. Right now, Hero Forge is doing a massive Black Friday sale with up to 20% off all of their physical miniatures and up to 50% off all their digital miniatures and STLs. These amazing deals mean you could be picking up an STL that you custom designed for as little as $4 USD. It really is a bit of a refreshing and fun treat to just make a cool mini on there for your RPG campaigns or objective markers. These miniatures have been rapidly painted up by Jen and they came up fantastically. But as for me, it's time for me to paint my miniature. So far, I'm having a blast. This model is kind of everything I wanted it to be. It's all the craziest and best parts of the Adeptus Mechanicum combined into one ridiculous sniper. I'm really happy with how the paint job's turning out. In fact, Zal Arcad, the Forge world, I think works really well as a 40k scheme, and it's so different from what you usually see. So in terms of taking my own advice, it's working a treat. So my last little anti-burnout tip for you all is the concept of deliberately giving yourself a win. You're drained, you're exhausted, maybe you're batch painting, or you haven't had the amount of time you wanted to put into certain projects, or things just aren't working out the way you wanted them to. Maybe you're painting a massive model and going through each step is this hugely time-consuming process, and you're finding it hard to enjoy the process because you're getting lost in the chore of it. Well, the idea of giving yourself a win is basically identifying something that you know you can do, or you want to do, or want to try, as I mentioned earlier, that you can achieve in a really manageable space of time. This might seem like a simple bit of advice, but I think it can be quite helpful. There's two main ways to look at this. One can be on painting particularly complex models. And the way that can work is, let's say you're painting a giant dragon and you're tired of painting all the scales, you're starting to feel worn down. You could pick a high detail but small area of the model that you're interested in painting to completion. Maybe the dragon has armor, cloth, or a saddle. You can pick any one of these components that has a significant amount less surface area and then tackle that instead. It's okay to stop the paint step you're currently on and just move on to something else on the model. This can allow you to get the satisfaction of seeing the finished result on a small scale on your model. Maybe seeing that mouth of the dragon finished with the teeth and some saliva effects you always wanted to try gives you that boost to know, hey, this is going to be finished one day and it's going to look awesome. The other way I've found to use this technique is to space out your army progress if you're painting armies. So let's say you buy a new army box for a new edition. For me, I like to identify what parts are going to be the most repetitious, what parts are going to be the most tiresome, and then I space out the interesting or exciting elements as rewards. This is going to be very personal for each person. Identify models in a box or army that you're most excited to paint, and then effectively space them out in your army painting plan. This can work even within squads. What I'll do is, for example, paint 3 regular traders with las guns and then reward myself with the flamethrower trooper, because that flamethrower is quite a significant piece of equipment. The model will be posed differently and have different war gear, and thus break up and keep fresh the way I paint. Then say I do another 3 base troops and the 8th model in the squad is the other special weapons troop or a Vox operator. Then I just have 1 more model to paint before the sergeant, the final reward for painting the squad. And while this doesn't make for the most efficient batch painting, you can actually do it after a batch painting step. Say you do batch painting on all of the squad's main armor color, but then as you move to the details, you can break it down into this reward system. Whatever it is that gives you that excitement, make sure you don't front load it and do it all first, because then the rest of your army will be a chore. And conversely, if you save it till last, you might never reach it as you bore yourself painting all of the models you're not as excited about painting. So I really hope some of our tips today will be useful to you in the future in allowing you to paint your armies. Get past that awful hobby burnout and keep enjoying the hobby we all share together. But I think there's one more thing I need to do in this video. That's right, it's time for me to show off my fun model, my refresher, my Skitarii Skatros from Zao Arcade. Thank you so much to all of our wonderful patrons for your support. This channel couldn't survive without your support, so we really do appreciate it. We do a weekly behind the scenes video as well as a monthly mini review, so you can stay up to date with everything that we do at the studio. If you've been enjoying our content and would like to consider helping out, supporting, and also joining our private mini club Discord, links are in the description. And as one last thank you to Hero Forge for sponsoring the video. Well, this has been a lot of fun getting to chill out and paint a model for an army I don't collect. You might have noticed I didn't do the base. That's because I didn't have any good ideas for it, and I let myself off easy today. I'll come up with a base that's going to contrast with it one day, maybe, but I don't have to. That's kind of the point of this video, right? Find your release wherever you can, find the joy in the hobby, and if something feels like an obligation, don't do it and just do the next thing that makes you happy. Worryingly, this model is super weird and cool and makes me want to collect AdMech, and I really like how the Zao Arcade scheme has come together on the model. So yeah, let us know in the comments if anything's been helpful to you, some of your hobby hurdles you've faced and how you might like to overcome them, and then other people can read your ideas as well, and we can all share our ways to enjoy the hobby a bit more going forward. Thanks to everyone for watching the video, and subscribe, like, share, all that. Battle report next week. Don't tell anyone I said.